For all of us, it's about predicting where the consumer is going and getting half of it right.
One of the things we want to do is create ads that don't suck.
Embracing change creates great possibility.
I'm Alan Hart, and this is Marketing Today.
Today on the show, I've got David Rubin. He's the CMO at the New York Times. He's the Times' first ever CMO, and he spearheaded much of the brand work around the Truth is Hard campaign for the last 2 years. He's going to give us a lowdown on how the Truth is Hard campaign has evolved over the years with He Said, She Said last year about this time at the Golden Globes, to the new edition, which is called The Truth is Worth It. We also get into the daily podcast, as well as some new products and apps around cooking, and obviously crossword puzzles. I think you're going to enjoy his version of what marketing looks like to him and the publishing model today. I hope you enjoy this show with David Rubin. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alan. Great to be here.
Well, let's start off with your background. Where did you start your career, and what's been the path to become CMO at the New York Times?
Well, I guess if you take me back that far, I started out of undergrad in politics, actually. My first 2 years were in Washington, D.C., working for a congressman from the south side of Milwaukee. And then I did 2 years working in the Clinton Treasury Department in economic policy. So I did 4 years of that path. And then I went to business school and kind of made a pivot from there. And in business school, I interned at Unilever, the consumer products company, and ended up joining there full time and spent 12.5 years or so at Unilever, consumer products, packaged goods marketing. Really did two things. I worked on the launch of Axe into the United States. So that was certainly a defining moment and a lot of fun. And then I switched over. I was mostly with Unilever in Chicago for most of this time, not all. And I switched over to their hair care division and worked on the U.S. hair care business. It happened to be there during a turnaround of that business. And they ended up becoming the largest hair care manufacturer in the United States for the first time in 30, 40 years. And that included an acquisition of Alberto Culver's business as well. So I did that. And in 2014, I left consumer products and went to Pinterest to be their head of brand. In some ways, a similar role to here. And I did that for a couple of years and then came over to the New York Times about not quite 3 years ago.
Wow. So you've gone from politics to consumer goods, Axe being one, to Pinterest to the New York Times. That's cutting across a lot of different areas.
You wouldn't have predicted that if you could script it from the beginning?
No. Just the notion of politics to Axe by itself is a head scratcher. But were there any pivotal moments that you can remember, or any mentors that can stand out to you along the way?
Yeah, I think on the pivotal moments part, I think the through line for me, and I joked before, I wouldn't have scripted that entire path myself, of course. And I think that's the beauty of anyone's career, but particularly of marketing, is the ability for serendipity to come in. But, for me, the through line is that all of those jobs had an element of mass marketing. In politics, you have something you believe passionately about, and you're trying to get a larger audience to care about it and agree with you. And then consumer products, obviously there's a lot of differences, but there are some similarities there. And then even from an Axe to Pinterest and the New York Times, I think, again, those are more in common than the politics part. But what they all have in common is it was marketing roles meant to have a mass impact and meant to get a large group of people having a deeper emotional connection with something, with a product or service. And that's been the thing that I think really defines my career and has been the underlying fun part of it all, is trying to influence, and be a part of culture on a mass scale.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. Well, let's talk about the New York Times. And I had done some research and I read this stat that I think is true, that it's been about 10 years since there was brand-focused TV for the New York Times before the Truth is Hard campaign debuted in 2017. Mm-hmm. Do I have that right?
It was hard to pinpoint the exact previous year. That number is about right. That's right.
Okay. All right. And what was the goal? How did it play out? And most people, I think, that are listening to this have seen that ad, but we'll probably link to it as well. Maybe you want to start with just a short description and then tell us how it all played out for you.
Yeah. So it was early March of 2017. So not super long after the election. And, I think right after the election, there was a lot of questions, a lot of change, a lot of uncertainty, and a lot of people very interested in the news and asking questions about what the future would look like. And so we thought that was a really good environment to, there was a whole debate going on. Fake news was very much a top of mind concept. The role of the platforms was being questioned and what happened in the election. And so it felt like, and we were very much in the news ourselves as well as reporting the news. And it felt like a really good time to try to tell a bit of our story in addition to having our story be told naturally. And so we thought the Oscars would be a really good canvas. We knew that there'd be a lot of discussion about the election and where the country was going in that platform and around it. And so we decided to tell an ad. And it was really important to us in that advertisement to talk about what we thought we did and to not set ourselves up to have a particularly strong political view or be oppositional to any one party or person. And so we did this ad, The Truth is Hard. And the ad talks about statements on all sides and how it is difficult to know what the facts are and are not. And we then finish with a series of statements, and one of them is The Truth is Hard, and then the New York Times. And I think we see that ad as a statement about the process of journalism and about how journalism, our readers are on a journey for the truth. We don't intend that ad to be a statement that the New York Times is the truth or the only truth or anything like that. We think it's about the process that our readers go through to discern for themselves what the truth is, and that we believe that journalism is a really critical input to that process. Independent, original, reporting, fact-based, and that's really what the ad's about. And so we were fortunate enough that a lot of people liked that message, and the reaction was really strong. In addition to the response immediately in the moment, the ad has gotten tens of millions of views. Some of the print versions of it we still see today, but we saw very much, people took them and put them in their restaurant windows. I mean, remember, this is an ad now, right? And people are putting it in their own businesses. We happen to have a free speech and a freedom of the press protest in front of our building, and people were holding up our print ad for that. You can today buy that print ad on a framed in a nice frame. I don't mean this as a plug for our merchandise, but people do it. We didn't, in my previous marketing jobs, we didn't usually sell our print work to people. And so it's been really, really heartwarming to see the response to it. We made buttons and pins and people wear them. A really interesting one, we've had 2 fashion houses license the Truth is Hard line and product. One, Sakai, which is a Japanese fashion house, did so. And their merchandise ended up as a window in Saks Fifth Avenue. So we had a New York Times ad campaign in Saks's windows in New York. We've had multiple celebrities buy their clothing and wear it and Instagram it. So not us paying for an influencer program, but people choosing to do so on their own.
Right.
So that's been the response, and it's been really great. Really a testament to if you can find an expression of your brand that means something to the end audience, you can provoke a response, and if you find the right moment to do it.
Yeah. Well, you've nailed it for most marketers today, trying to figure out how to turn their marketing into content that people would actually pay money for. They're paying for your ads, these prints of these ads. It's so awesome. It's awesome.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we really tried to. It's really important that it starts from something that's really true about us, right? And that's why that distinction is really important to us. Is that these ads are about the process of journalism, and we really try to stick with that. And it's really important that we show a breadth of that work, and that we really try to we think the New York Times is about at its corest is about seeking the truth and helping people understand the world. And we try to bring that to life in advertising. Advertising is a pretty unforgiving format, particularly a 30-second television. You don't get a lot of time. And so how do you tell that story in a really authentic way that ultimately the end user cares about, but is also emotional? So I'm glad you like it.
That's good. That's good. I know we're going to talk about the 2 more extensions, I guess, of that campaign, or maybe they're new versions. But before we do that, you mentioned fake news, and I just want to get your thoughts. Like, what has been the impact of this whole fake news cultural phenomenon on the New York Times? I mean, in some ways, as an outsider, I look at it and I go, "Wow, your digital subscriptions are going up." But the other, there has to be kind of a more holistic impact, I feel like, going on, especially to the people that work there.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things. I mean, on the cautious side, you're absolutely right. Long term, the new, what we do, independent original reporting worth paying for, requires that people know what that is and be news literate and be able to tell the difference between opinion and news, and tell the difference between thoroughly reported work and just things that are happening and things people are seeing. And so that's really important. And I think we worry greatly about whether the conditions for that to happen exist, and whether everything's just getting all lumped in together, and whether the media, this concept of the media being a single monolithic thing, which could not be less true, but is certainly the way people talk, how that fares on us long term. But I will also say that this discussion about fake news and what's happened on the platforms, and whether people are getting a good experience in their newsfeed, and whether they're really, or whether it's counterproductive, is helpful to us in particular, because I think it's helping people realize that quality reporting really does matter. And when you get it, you have to find it. But when you get it, you really do get a difference of understanding. And so I think what we see is more and more people seeking it out, more and more people being willing to come, not just read whatever news comes to them, or even the New York Times, on a platform, but really seeking it out on our platform. And for us, as a subscription product, it really is required that you want to engage regularly with our product for you to be wanting to pay for it. And so that's the big difference, I think, between perfectly reasonable news sources that are mostly or completely an advertising driven model, and the small subset of the industry that are subscription driven. Is we really need to have deep engagement in order for somebody to pay for it. And I think it's a really helpful, positive cycle that we get in, and incentives, because it puts the New York Times in a position that if you can't tell right away that this is a better quality of reporting, and that you get a better quality of understanding as a result of it, the extra work and the payment that we ask for, you're just not going to do it.
Right. That's a good point. That's a great point. Well, one of the extensions of this campaign came out, and it was, I guess, called He Said, She Said. And it came out, I believe, last year during the Golden Globes. For context, historical reference, Harvey Weinstein was in the news. There was the hashtag #MeToo movement just starting. What was the response to that as an advertisement and as marketing? But maybe why was it important for the Times to weigh in on that?
Yeah, so you're right. It was about a year after that first ad that we talked about, The Truth is Hard.
Yeah.
And we had, our reporters had been pivotal in both the Bill O'Reilly story and the Weinstein story. And our, Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey in particular on the Weinstein story had really done a lot of that work. And so we thought it was a really good time to talk about the role that journalism played in uncovering that story. And while, the Me Too movement happened as a result and comes out of that, the reporting itself's role was to get the facts on the table and to hold power to account. And so we thought it was a perfect ad and a good pivot for the campaign to move from that broad first statement of basically that, you're on a journey for the truth and journalism plays a role in that, to talk about a body of work and a specific set of articles of investigative reporting that as a result of that reporting has prompted society and certain industries to look at themselves and to ask if change should happen. We don't think journalism is about determining the course of that change, but we do think journalism is about getting the facts on the table and asking people the question about whether they want the world to be different. And I think that's what that reporting did. And so it was a great, I think, provocation for us in marketing to say, hey, we want you to know that the journalism played a role in this starting. And so that's why we did it. And the response to that was, frankly, even stronger. Even more organic views on it, a lot of chatter and conversation about it. And, as a marketer, it was such a privilege to, do a very small part to shine even more light on the work that these really tireless and completely impressive journalists were able to do.
Well, then you followed that up with the Truth is Worth It campaign. And this one, I've enjoyed the other two, but I feel like you keep raising the bar each time you do this, because this takes you into the daily lives, if you will, of a reporter chasing the story. And I'm a stickler for visuals. And so you move from more of a black and white concept into showing your fantastic photojournalism too in some of these. And, where did that idea come from to pivot to the work? It sounds like it may have already been embedded all along. You talked about the process of journalism, but was there a moment where you said, hey, we're going to extend this and it's, we're going to make it even more visual than it has been to date?
Well, let's separate the message and the visual device part. We'll talk about both, but on the message evolution, we had always sort of envisioned getting more direct and overt over time. There was definitely a bit of, see where it goes. And for us, what we thought that supplementing those first two messages with getting closer to, all this work we're talking about, it's worth it. It's worth it for you and it's worth it for us. And so it's a bit of a statement of impact, a little like the he said, she said ad, but it's also a lot of a statement about the work that goes into it. And, if I'm honest, I think we've been inspired by our podcast, The Daily, the hit podcast, where I think we've really shown, and Michael Barbaro and Lisa Tobin and team have really shown that we can get people interested in the process of journalism. And so we thought that showing that in advertising and showing that process and really trying to say that subscribing is not a call to action for us in those ads, it's a brand message. We're trying to differentiate that the work at the Times is different than the type of journalism you can get in most other places, and therefore it's worth paying for. In some ways, it's a statement about this small category as much as it is a statement about the Times. We think that's really important. It's actually an interesting sort of mindset thing that comes with me from my consumer products days is, thinking about the Times purely as a consumer product, because it is, and thinking about it as like, what are we in at the moment? Well, we're in a situation where we're trying to grow our category. We have a very small category. There are 175 million digital news readers in the US, and less than 15 million are paying for a digital news product. And so we've got this, in the Times' numbers, we've got 4.3 million subscribers. So there's lots, for us, it's not about moving that by ones and twos, but about this big sea change of getting a large group of people to think they need to pay for the news. And I think The Truth is Worth It was a way to try to put that in consumer relevant language to say that paying for the news is something you should think about.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Now, where did the visual treatment enter in?
I did say I would talk about that. Yeah. I think also we've always wanted to do it. An interesting thing about the first two campaigns, the Truth is Hard and the Truth Has a Voice, we also were moving pretty fast. Both of those campaigns were made in 6 weeks or less. And so the visual device was both, we thought, a stark contrast and a great way to stand out, but also it was a practical reality. And we've always wanted to do more with visuals because the Times is a lot of our story today is as much visual as it is words. But we needed to find the right way to do it. And so with this campaign and by talking about the process that we go through, it lets us create this sort of not entirely linear story, but that tries to help you feel like you understand how hard it is for a journalist to do their job. And I think Droga 5, who came up with that campaign, I think did a really masterful job of making you sort of see how a story comes together, how the journalist may actually end up at the end in a different place than where they start because they start with a question and they go wherever it'll lead. And you also see in some of the executions all the different things that can happen to try to thwart you from getting to that story. Some of them being misdirections, some of them being more physical threats, hacking, just all the things that a journalist may go through as they're trying to help you see the truth and understand the truth. And I think what it does at the end of that is lets you see that the journalistic process really is special, something to cherish and protect, and something that's worth, that brings you a value that's worth you paying for.
Well, I think, your notion about building the category and, trying to grow the category and obviously attach yourself as a leader in that category. It's something that's lost today, I think, on a lot of categories. I keep using that word, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to it from all different angles, from, a brand equity perspective, growing the category and standing for the category. If you are a leader in that category, can cement you for years. And then I've talked to neuroscience folks too, that, the stronger those connections are between your brand and whatever it is that I'm going to get, obviously puts you in a top position as they think about where to go get that thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just want to applaud you because I think it's a kind of a lost focus in many marketing settings today. So good job.
Thanks for saying that. And, I think it's one of the things I love about this job. And it's really challenging because we have to operate on multiple levels and timeframes all at the same time. The journalism is a tough business. It's no secret that the industry has a lot of challenges. And even though we at the Times are doing well and we're proud of what we've accomplished, we don't kid ourselves that the future still needs to be determined. And so as we do that, we need to win today. I talked about the long term of growing the category, but we have to go from 4.3 to 4.35 to 4.4, keep going. And so we do have a performance mindset. And, and every single new subscriber really does matter as we attempt to pay for the world's greatest news gathering operation on the planet. But we also take a really long-term view. And it's one of the great things about the Times. The Times has been owned for over 100 years by the Sulzberger family. And even though it's a public company today, they really direct it with a long-term view. And so we can make the right moves for the long term while we also worry about the short term. And so it allows us and allows me as a marketer to say, yes, a good part of our job is to build the category and to put in place the right conditions where people want to pay for the news over time. But we also have to make sure we're building a marketing organization that empowers us and enables us to win, month to month, quarter to quarter.
Right. We're talking a little bit about the business model, and you've obviously got subscriptions. You've got increasingly numbers of digital subscriptions as well. And yet, advertising is still a critical component, I would imagine. How do you balance those two things, right? And do you ever foresee a world where the Times is primarily a Netflix style subscription, meaning there's no advertising? Or do you believe that, no, it's always going to, as far as I can tell, it's always going to coexist with advertising?
So we do believe that there's a role for advertising in our model. And we don't foresee a world where we don't have advertising. It is true today that the lion's share of our revenues come from subscriptions, which is a switch from, a decade ago, a pretty dramatic switch. And so back in 2013, we made a commitment with our innovation report and our path forward, as we call it, to be a subscription first business. And I think every year since then and every day since then, it's become more clear what that means for us. And it's not that we don't have an advertising business. It's not that we don't invest in our advertising business, and we certainly value and appreciate our advertising partners. But what we find is that the more we grow our consumer business and the connection we have with the end user, the better our ad business gets. And that may be counterintuitive, but they come together. I mean, ultimately what advertisers want, they want a deeply engaged audience that they can tell their message to in appropriate ways. And the Times has that, and has that more than it's ever had. And so we see the two things as actually more synergistic from a business model perspective, and that having the consumer subscription first mindset actually lifts all boats.
Yeah, no, I haven't thought about it like that, but it makes perfect sense that it's engaging enough for somebody to reach into their pocket and give you money for it. It's going to be even that much more attractive to advertisers.
And it obviously puts pressure on us, because once you're paying for it, it puts pressure on us to make sure that that experience is the best one you can have. I mean, ultimately, you've got to seek out Times content, both physically with your time and also pay for it. And so we treat that from the reader and from the subscriber with the utmost care. But, we think that when we're showing them advertising that they appreciate, that supplements their experience, I think that it all works out.
Well, you're expanding your product offering. You mentioned the daily earlier, and it's a podcast format. You've got the cooking subscription as well. Tell me a little bit about this cooking product and what it is and how you're launching it.
So we have a standalone cooking and a crosswords app. The crosswords one's been around for several years, and cooking's been around for a couple now. About a year ago, cooking went to a pay model, and crosswords has been there for a couple of years. And so they're standalone subscriptions, depending on your package with the Times. If you get a full package, you may have access, or you can get cooking or crosswords on your own. And, we're seeing good success with them. It becomes a way to either add more value and get people into a higher package if it's with the core subscription, or for people who might not want to pay for the Times for the core news product, gives them a way to connect with the brand and pay for the brand for the content that they want. And so it's, been really popular. We started just a couple of weeks ago, did our first brand campaign for cooking. We've done direct response work, but it was our first brand campaign for it, which we unveiled in the end of January, and really helping people see that, how does the Times journalistic philosophy translate into a cooking and a recipe app? Yeah.
No, it looks phenomenal. I haven't checked it out yet in its entirety, but it looks like something I would use, or at least my house would use quite a bit.
It's great. I think the thing about New York Times readers in general is they're really curious people. They want to engage with the world. They see the world as an exciting place that should be learned through cultures and through other people. And so that becomes a whole world thing. Of course, that includes politics and core news and policy, but it includes business. It includes recipes. It includes meditation and service journalism. It includes culture and fashion. And the newspaper always did that. And we're trying to carry that forward into the digital era. And it really is the thing that sets the Times apart, is we help you understand the entire world and your entire world, not just a narrow subset of something.
Right. Well, you're also building campaigns for the Daily, and obviously I love podcasts. Talking on one, but the notion of advertising a podcast in the real world, with, I think you were using out of home in some instances, at train stations or bus depots. What was the notion behind that? Was it, I can't escape right now the Mobituaries podcast that CBS has launched, because it seems to be everywhere that CBS talks about anything. But what was your thought process behind bringing a podcast into the physical world, and how's it performed so far?
Well, I think we had two things we were trying to do. One is we wanted to see if we could continue to grow the audience and expand it to new audiences. I mean, the Daily was doing well on its own.
Right. The top podcast.
Yeah, the top podcast. But we wanted to see if we could continue to fuel that and introduce it to new people who might not have yet tried it. And then secondly, the Daily is also just a great expression of what we think makes our journalism different, not just the daily different, but our entire journalism. It's become a way for people to hear the story behind the news stories that they're hearing, and to hear how those stories got told, and to understand the process of journalism. There have been lots of moments in the daily where you get to see the journalists as people, whether that's getting stuck at a Kinko's, like Mike Schmidt was in an early episode, and needing to borrow the phone behind the desk. And just people don't think of New York Times journalists as going into a Kinko's and putting a quarter into a machine, and so it humanized us in our work. There was actually the episode today, I don't know if you listened, but the very opening gets cut off because the reporter has to go see a breaking news announcement from the administration, and literally Michael Labarra's left there on the other end, waiting to restart the podcast interview. And other places might cut that out. The Daily leaves it in because this is journalism's happening real time, and it's messy, and we're not trying to hide that from anyone. And so back to the advertising, I think the campaign was a way to emphasize that and show that to more people, is that the Daily's not just the Daily, it's also the New York Times, and is a reason to connect with the journalism. We've been happy to see the Daily's bringing a whole new set of listeners, broader, younger, into listening. And many of them are going on to read more than they did. And as they read more, they subscribe. And so, that's a great user journey for us, and doesn't necessarily have to work that way, but it does. And so we wanted to lean into that.
Well, you've got apps across a number of different niche areas. You've got podcasts. You've got obviously your print. What's next? What do you got? Can you share anything about the future of where the Times is going to look like?
Well, you said you didn't want me to break news here. So I won't be very specific, but I think the thing for us is that we seek the truth, and we help people understand the world. And that may seem obvious, but it's taken a long time to really be able to articulate it well for ourselves. And as long as we're fulfilling that mission, the world's going to continue to evolve and change, and people are going to interact with news differently. We'll continue to evolve along with that. And it's staying true to that core mission, though, that we have to do. And that gives us our North Star. This business is so hard because you really do have to pivot very fast, and it's really difficult to come up with things that make money. And so you got to be willing to change a lot of things. So what don't you change? Because otherwise you stand for nothing. And that's what I think that journalistic process and how it helps you understand the world is the part we won't change. I'm sure, we're making innovations into voice. We've certainly looked at AR and for that VR, and we're doing great work in visual journalism, which we'll continue to do. And we'll continue to pivot as things change and technology advances. But that core proposition of the brand hasn't and won't change.
Well, I've got a few more questions, and I'd love to kind of switch gears, if it's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Talk about you versus the Times. And I love asking this question to folks that come on the show, which is, is there an experience of your past that defines or makes up who you are today?
I grew up in Baltimore City and went to public school in Baltimore. And so I grew up with lots of cultures and diversity around me. And I think that's something that's stuck with me my entire life. The thing that united all of us was a group of people who all smart, all trying to learn and come together as a community. And so that's something that's stuck with me. It's stuck with me as I think about building our team here. How do we get diverse experiences and build a single unifying culture from that diversity? And that's something that I keep in my marketing, and I keep in my personal life, and I keep, as we try to build our team.
Yeah, no, I love it. I'm a public school kid myself, so I understand what you mean. That's great. What advice would you give your younger self if you were to start all over again?
There are two things that I really believe in, and I think my experience has, fortified in my head. The first is the more things change, the more they stay the same. And I'll talk more about that. And the second is the belief of right brain, left brain. And they sort of come together for me. The great thing happens when those two things come together, art and science. And so on the first one, I look at marketing and marketing in crisis and whatever else you want to hear about. And if you zoom back and take a longer term view, I actually think some of the basic truths, go back to the David Ogilvy or the fictional Don Draper era.
Right.
The idea of basic brand truths are more true today than they've ever been. And that as soon as you forget that you need to stand for something and have an authentic and committed expression of that something you stand for that goes over time is when you get in trouble, right? You start chasing too much whatever works for you this moment, and then you zoom out a little bit and you're not sure people aren't sure what you stand for anymore. And it happens slowly to where you can't see it. And so I think that basics of marketing of the things that were true a long time ago stay true, even as how we express them and the vehicles that we have to deliver have to evolve. And that gets to the second point, which is that I have done this in my career, but committing to both. How do you develop and lead for creativity and ideas? Because ultimately the emotional connection is still what drives businesses long term. But how do you supplement that and with the latest technology, with data-driven insights, and with a real speed? And I think it's probably the biggest difference both over my career and moving from consumer products to a direct-to-consumer digital business. We're changing things every minute, and we're expecting to learn how they did minutes later. I've said this in other interviews, but we've generally made all our campaigns in 6-week kind of timeframes. And we've just got to build the capability to do that. So that's a very different mindset that I think is, frankly, it's more fun, but it's hard.
Right. Well, what keeps you going? What fuels you?
I think professionally, what I had said when I was in consumer products was that I like turning the mundane into the magical. Take a deodorant category and make it such that a 19-year-old boy will want to put his deodorant on his sink.
Right.
People can see it, and people would have said that was impossible. And we did it. Hair care certainly is a category that has always mattered to a lot of people, but it's a sea of sameness. And I think why we were able to turn around and win was that we really doubled down on talking about what made our products different and what made our philosophies different rather than just chasing everyone else. Pinterest was then about working to broaden who they appealed to and make it matter to more people. And then, the Times is certainly not mundane in any way. But, what we've been able to do is proactively insert ourselves in culture and tell our story more overtly and more proactively rather than just let our story be told for us. And so it's that idea of sort of taking something and not making culture from it, but running alongside culture and inserting it into culture that I think is and putting that magic into things that people buy and interact with. That is what keeps me going in this business.
That's great. I got 2 quick questions for you, I think. They may not be that quick, but we'll see. Marketers tend to be students of the business and watch other things out in the world. Are there any brands or companies that you follow or you think others should be taking notice of?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say the obvious, but I think what Nike's been doing recently and how they recover from periods where they're not as happy with their performance, I think is just really impressive. And they do that without overly pivoting, right? Mm-hmm. Without just chasing something. And so, what I think made their most recent campaign, assuming that is the most recent campaign, but the Kaepernick thing, such a thing, wasn't just the great execution they did, but was the fact that they've had a commitment there.
Right.
And the fact that he was already a spokesperson for them. And so they were doubling down on something and on a philosophy that they'd been doing. I think too often brands look at their mission or their purpose as something that they bolt on top of their business. Mm-hmm. And I think it never goes well. And I think same thing with the Times. This place has been a mission-driven company since 100 years before that term was even invented. And so, for the harder part for us has been to have the clarity of what the business is. Right. And so we've been trying to put our business on top of our mission. And I think a lot of places put their mission on top of their business. And I think that doesn't go well. And so I admire how Nike seamlessly fuses the two together because otherwise people see through it.
No, that's great. That's great. Well, last question for you. What do you think the future of marketing is going to hold?
Well, at the risk of repeating myself, I think it is this, I think it will be art and science together. I think it's people who can really dive deep into the data and understand their audience and what they want and connect with them, but can do that with creativity and with nuance and in a way that is emotional first and functional, but not without the functional.
Got it. Well, David, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been a good discussion.
Hi, it's Alan again. Marketing Today was created and produced by me, with writing and editing by Kevin Greeley, social media support by Megan Woods, art and graphic design by Sarah Dell. If you're new to Marketing Today, please feel free to write us a review on iTunes or your favorite listening platform. Don't forget to subscribe and tell your friends and colleagues about the show.
I love to hear from listeners, and you can contact me at marketingtodaypodcast.com. There you'll also find complete show notes with links to anything we talk about on any episode. You can also search our archives.
I'm Alan Hart, and this is Marketing Today.